All right, so now for something completely different. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about newborn screening. I have a few disclaimers up front. None of those are my children. I'm also not a parent. Everybody has some kind of relationship with the rare disease community. I have no direct family connection to the rare disease community. I have never been a part of a drug going through the FDA process. More happy about that one than the rest of the But that said, I did become a part of what's going on here a couple years ago through a pretty interesting story that led quite directly to us working to add a new newborn screening to the recommended uniform screening panel. I'll explain that process a little bit as well. For heart defects in newborns. And there are a wide range of heart defects, and that was part of why this process was pretty interesting. But I know we've kind of already gone through the how a bill becomes a law. I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill so far. But I want to talk to you about kind of how a newborn screen becomes part of the panel, and kind of how that shook out specifically with this screen. So just basically who we are, I represent two different organizations. I'm the executive director of the Newborn Foundation and the Newborn Coalition. So one is education, advocacy. It works very closely with a patient advocacy organization that we have within us called 1 in 100. We focus on, like I said, congenital heart disease in newborns and the not just the screening but the follow-up for those that have been diagnosed and how that works throughout their life. The other is the coalition. The coalition is basically in place to lobby. It was put in place 2 years ago specifically to deal with this issue as it was going through the recommended uniform screening panel process. They work very closely together, obviously different reasons, but that's kind of where we're coming from. So along the lines of what we do, so the foundation does its policy development. So the idea of how we're going to implement these policies both nationally and on the state level. The process design, so we take what is available clinically and say, how is this going to be infused in a policy process that will lead to best outcomes for everybody that's involved. We're also a non-governmental organization. Joel said I just flew back from very far, which is true. And we work with foreign governments as well to try and set up processes for not only newborn screening, but for a lot of the infrastructure needs for newborn health. On the coalition side is the legislative advocacy. So why we care, I co-founded the Newborn Coalition 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, a woman named Anna Marie Saarinen. Some of you might know her. She is a very vocal parent advocate. Eve was born in Minnesota, and at 40 hours of age, she was diagnosed with a critical congenital heart defect. You can see from the second bullet point, I say that congenital heart defects affect 1 in 100-ish births. It's because it's probably about 1 in 106, but we're talking about just congenital heart defects, not the critical ones. Those are more rare. About 1 in 1,000 can be more. Obviously not as rare as the traditional or really any rare definition, but rather this was something that it's a little different in that we're not talking about a rare disease, but we are talking about a newborn screen. So the process applies, and that's how we kind of entered into this. The screening for it is pulse oximetry. Anybody who's been in the hospital remembers the clip with the red light on their finger. They do that for every adult who coughs or sneezes that comes in through a hospital door, but they don't do it for newborns before they leave, which is seemingly foolish. But the reason why is not clinical. It has much to do with reimbursement. In the state of California, if you walk in coughing or sneezing, and you are on Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California, there's a $14 reimbursement to the hospital for clip. And in the newborn population, there is 0 reimbursement, so there is no clip. It's actually a Velcro for kids. So I want to walk you through a little timeline. The timeline's going to grow like a child. So this is kind of where we entered in the process. With the Secretary Advisory Committee, how this works is that there's an evidence review process, and then once that evidence is given to the committee, it's nominated to be evaluated by the larger committee. And so in 2009, we were starting to see some early statements from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Heart Association on how pulse oximetry screening can be used. It was a viable screen. Also, talk about Minnesota a little bit. We started to see some pulse oximetry pilots that were coming out. So you're starting to see the research, the evidence is gathering. I think everybody here has been a part of an evidence review, or at least a gathering of evidence in the past. I know many of them take place around the kitchen table, and this is very much how this effort started. Wait. There we go. Coming through 2010, we got the nomination to the Secretary's Advisory Committee process. There was a meeting. We were all standing there. We were kind of surprised that it actually happened during that meeting. But the Secretary's Advisory Committee nominated pulse oximetry use for this screening. And just for background, in 2009, I don't know, I wasn't here in the morning, so I don't want to go over too much that had already been said, but there was a law actually introduced by then Senator Hillary Clinton that was called the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act. And what it did was it created this advisory committee with the standard extremely long acronym, the Secretary's Advisory Committee for Heritable Disorders in Newborns and Children, SACHDNC. And what that does is it creates, it's an advisory panel to the Secretary, so it makes non-binding recommendations to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who then makes non-binding recommendations to the rest of the United States. So it's one of those really awesome Washington processes that are very complicated but non-binding. And in 2010, that advisory committee voted to make the recommendation to the Secretary for her then to take it under advisement and make a subsequent recommendation. So we're recommending a way, we're doing much better now. In 2011, we started to see a couple of things happen that really changed the way thinking took place. So not only were we working through the Secretary's Advisory Committee process, but we were also seeing many of the states that refused to wait. And this is where I think things become particularly interesting, because many times, most of the time, all the time, when you see states implementing new recommended newborn screening, usually they're waiting for the recommendations from the Secretary's Advisory Committee panel. I don't know if there's anybody here from the SCID community. So severe combined immunodeficiency and CCHD screening were two of the ever that have been added to the panel through this process. Very, very different conditions. Although because they happened in that order, interestingly enough, so SCID went first and CCHD, a lot of the legislation that was passed on the state level was actually the SCID piece of legislation with a kind of one of those find and replace in Word, and they just replaced everything with CCHD. So if you imagine a pulse oximetry screening, which is the clip or the Velcro, it was a blood test in about 12 of the different pieces of state legislation. So in come the parent advocates to explain why that is not the case. And it was the first part of that process. So what I would say is beyond the recommendations, one of the things that we saw was New Jersey was the first to pass legislation. So they passed legislation. It was one of those full speed ahead kind of things. And they said, you have 90 days. You have 90 days from right now to figure out how to implement a screening for all your newborns. And just do it. Unfunded. Figure it out. And so the state responded to its legislators. It freaked out a bit, but it responded to its legislators. And there it is, August 2011. On the very first day of implementation of the screening, they identified a child with a critical congenital heart lesion. So talk about proof of concept, right? I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. And also from the political perspective, because unfortunately we have to deal with these things in very political terms, this was extremely ideal considering the Secretary's Advisory Committee process. And so here, the one change to the map for the next year is at the very top there, September 2011. Secretary Bialick formally writes this letter saying, yes, you are now recommended to go out and do that. So I'll show you, that's actually Eve, that's the little girl in question. She's barnstorming the crypt of the US Capitol right now. And I think what is particularly interesting, considering she's 4 years old now, is that her barefoot stamping through the Capitol, screaming, She actually ran into Representative Rangel and almost knocked him down, which was another funny part of the story. But her barefoot running through the Capitol, I think, is exactly the flavor of what getting this screening done was. And so the kind of the pieces I'll move on through here is that, and part of this has changed because sometimes we talk about this internationally, but so cabinet level officials. So the secretary is generally able to make a recommendation that is binding or non-binding. So that's what she did. So the responsibility fell to the states. Now the states could either do it legislatively, like oftentimes you see in SCID, or sometimes through the state, you have your own advisory committee panel. So you could have an advisory committee panel for heritable disorders in newborns and children that follows the guidelines of the Secretary's advisory committee for those same heritable disorders in newborns and children. Or you can have your own all-comers, do whatever you want kind of state, one of the fun party states, like West Virginia. Anybody here from West Virginia? No? It's having too much fun in West Virginia, I guess. So let me jump into 2012. We started to see that Indiana became the second state to fully implement CCHD screening. It wasn't standalone legislation. It actually went through part of their HHS appropriation. Very exciting. And then HRSA started funding demonstration projects so that we could really see how, if this is going to be implemented nationally, what some of the best practices are. And so that was part of the process that we saw go into effect. I want to talk to you a little bit about the legislative opposition that we got. And I've been a part of the at least reforming or editing 23 state pieces of legislation now. And many of them are unfunded mandates. Many of them are just say, you need to do the screening, you gotta do it right now, good old New Jersey style. So the state hospital associations obviously are concerned about this. California was the great example. $14 for an adult, no dollars for a kid. Where do I get these dollars, they ask. What do I do about staff time, they ask. Well, how much does it cost $14 for your staff time to plug that onto adult? No. How much does it cost for a child to come back into your hospital in full respiratory collapse because they have an undiagnosed CCHD? In fact, I know that answer because I had to figure it out for California, which is it covers about 2,000 screens. So every kid that you come in that survives, that comes in, it covers about 2,000 of the screenings. And that can be adjusted based on state, based on Medicaid, yada, yada. State departments of health were the other ones that are pushing back. You wouldn't think that because they're the State Department of Health. But because this is different, it's a point of care examination. It's not something that you stick the heel, send it off to the state lab. This is something that stands on its own. They didn't think that this fit. And a lot of the people that were involved in this didn't think it fit. And that was kind of the, I want to say the fun part, but it was the interesting part of why this moved through the way it did. So they didn't believe it fell under their jurisdiction. Look at a state like West Virginia, Department of Health and Human Services, newborn screening department. CCHD is in the Health and Human Services portion. It does not talk to the newborn screening part. Look at a state like New Jersey. It actually is run through their newborn screening department. Some other states, and so it became this really interesting political science experiment because what we're talking about is not just implementing the screening, we're also talking about the follow-up aspect of it and how it's covered. If it goes to the newborn screening department, a lot of the newborn screening legislation that exists has some kind of fee built into it so that it covers the cost. And they can increase the fee legislatively as easily as they can add a new screening separately legislatively, or there's sometimes a regulatory process for that. And so why this was such an interesting part of it was we are starting to see states that were going, oh, this has been really easy, or other states going, we have no idea what to do. Please help us. And luckily, you have two things. You have an extremely active advocacy community here that was able to help connect not only state people to resources, but parents and family to resources to help ease the long-term follow-up transition. But you also saw groups of newborn screening department, HHS, providers getting together and really discussing this and really having a robust conversation around it. It was very positive. As someone who had been working in newborn screening to a certain extent before this, it was not the same because you were seeing there was a real panic. It wasn't just we're going through the process, we're working through it, we're doing it. There was a real concern that they weren't going to be able to live up to the legislative mandate that they had to deal with. So I know I'm going to be short on time, so I want to run through just a couple quick things. One is the common questions and comments we got, especially in states. Aren't hospitals already doing this screening? No. Next question. This is like religion. You almost always got these exact questions, and it was kind of funny. So if you're going to hear one question tomorrow, you're going to hear it in a couple different offices. How long do we have to do this? Until people stop having children. That's when you can stop doing this. The screening may be cheap, but the defects we do identify will be expensive. That is a big one, especially for states that don't have a lot of good follow-up infrastructure in place. So we start to talk about what is the cost-benefit analysis of letting children die that have been identified for screening, which is such a bizarre conversation, but I have had it now in 14 states. And I have numbers for you, if you want, about why that's not true. And so, but that is the reality when you're dealing with someone that looks at this in terms of ones and zeros, zeros and ones, decimal points. This is a low priority for our state. We can't afford this right now. Okay, I guess I get that. I think about some of the states that are dealing with the problems Joel White's causing with his exchanges, and there's some significant costs, non-trivial costs that they're trying to figure out. The hospital associations are freaking out. The insurers are freaking out. Their state legislators who have a job 2 months out of the year because it's a part-time legislature. These are weird issues that they're not used to dealing with. And so they're saying, this is a very low priority for my state. I don't want to implement CCHD screening right now. Well, okay, maybe, but you're dealing with a larger issue here. And it's not just the moral issue, because we've already, through that first question, dealt with the fact that the moral issue has gone completely out the window. We're looking at it more in the context of how we can use this to raise all ships. And I know that the one thing that we have learned through newborn screening is that we built in reporting with a lot of it. There are yeses and nos that are built into this system. Well, you're positive for the screen, yes, no. And right now, you have also states that are trying to figure out how to beef up their electronic medical records. An argument could be made that the foundational element in every electronic health record, especially for kids that are working in state programs, should in fact be their newborn screening. And in the case of high-risk pregnancies or family histories that include risk factors as well, maternal data should be the point that this starts. And I see a lot of heads nodding here, and it's nice to have validation, because I say this to my wife all the time. She's like, I know, kids, we get it, please stop. But to a legislator in a state, I just talked about how the HIE grant program, the Meaningful Use $27 billion incentive programs for Medicaid are going to enter into this. I started talking about Community College Consortium for employment in servicing these. I'm starting to talk about new funding streams here, creative ways to talk about how we're going to raise all ships that starts with this single thing that we're all looking for. And I think the biggest takeaway we have to have from being here in Washington in the most bizarre time ever is to think about how it's not just about one condition. It's not just about one screening. This was not about CCHD screening. Like I said, I had no context or contact with someone with a congenital heart defect up to this point. But as, again, my wife tells me, I have an adolescent interest in infrastructure. So the problem became, how do you take a workflow, point of care examination, which is extremely disruptive to workflow, and build that into a process that will, quite honestly, make the care for newborns better for all newborns. And I think that we're in a unique position here because we're being forced into the box that is, we're all in the same boat here. Forced into a box, we're all in the same boat. Raise all ships, cliche. We're all kind of in the same area here, which is that we're now looking at this differently. We're not all conditions, one condition, we are essentially all conditions, and we're not talking about a single screen, we're talking about screening. And the reason we're talking about that is because we're talking about babies, and we're talking about future taxpayers and future employed folks. I want to finish up here. Oh, yeah, that's pretty much what I said on the last one. Yeah, if we don't have room for follow-up. That comes up a lot, especially in rural states. Yet, you'll get it. There's a difference between access to a solution and the existence of a solution. I think that's the other one where they say there's no cure. They go, well, there is a cure. You just don't. Maybe you haven't heard of it. Let me tell you about what I do. And then the other one is, it is not an excuse to allow preventable morbidities and mortalities. It isn't. I don't care who you are. I don't care what state you're from or how bad things are. It's not. So if there's one thing that you take away from all of this, I hope that it is this. What we're talking about is create an environment in which the market can be most effectively reactive. And what we're talking about is exactly that. We are allowing all these people to talk together about this. We're saying that maybe there's not a treatment for it yet, but we are creating an environment where on the regulatory side, on the scientific side, on the commercial side, on the parent advocacy side, if the support drops off somewhere, there's someone else to catch us because we're working as a network in a large community. And that is the most important thing we can do right now, is work in that way. So that's just to kind of show you how far we've come. I mean, how many is that? 4 years? 4 years. I mean, that's really fast in this town. Huh? And then I want to show you where we are today. cchdScreeningMap.org, if anybody cares. What it is it's a map that looks at the rollout of CCHD screening in the US. It's updated almost daily. In fact, because there were a lot of symbolic introductions around Valentine's Day for heart defect screening, get it? That was pretty tough to keep up with. We have 9 states that have passed legislation. We have 23 states with active legislation. My favorite numbers here are that in 2011, before the Secretary's recommendation, we looked at about 0.03% of hospitals that were screening. September of 2012, we were looking at about 10%. And after Q2, so of this year, we believe that 20% of hospitals in the United States will be screening kids using pulse oximetry for critical congenital heart disease. And that is a lot of kids that aren't going to go home. That is a lot of kids that will not come back in a rush. And that is a lot of families that will go on to have just beautiful kids. So I want to, oh, wrong way. Oh my gosh. I work in health IT, I swear. Okay, so I want to thank you guys. Again, not my children. But I said, I think at this point, which is pretty interesting to me, is that I had no context or contact with newborn screening or newborn health beyond kind of what I do in my job. And so when a month ago, we found out that my wife is 3 months pregnant, surprise! I'm like the most, if you're a doctor, you don't want me as like a patient, or especially like tangentially a patient, like in the hospital room with my wife, because working in newborn screening as I do, I'm like, all right, so let's talk about carrier testing. And they're like, whoa, let's make sure she's pregnant, you know? So I'm asking 1,000 questions. I want every recessive screening. Well, do you have, asking, is he Jewish? I think my grandfather was happy. Yeah, we're gonna do this. And so it got kind of out of control, mainly because I'm asking a lot of questions, you know, opening all the drawers. My wife is like, never gonna let me come to another doctor's appointment. And, but then I thought about this and how this process has changed. These screenings weren't available for a lot of people. This environment wasn't the way it is for me because of the industry side of things, because of the parent advocates that have pushed for that so far. So the thank you is really for you guys, not only for listening to me blab, because like I said, no one listens to me at home, but also to say that you guys are the fight. And so, I mean, create the environment. So that's what we're doing. So we're very happy to support anything I can do to help. Let me know. So based on my, here's what we ran into, because there were other conditions that we're running through at the same time as CCHD. One is that they don't believe there's enough evidence to support that the screening actually will identify in the false positive rate will be low enough. We had a major problem with that in CCHD because there hadn't been a US study to scale yet. We are looking at some stats from Sweden, the Granelli study. There were a lot of mortality studies in the US, but nothing about like actually doing the screening. And one of the big things we run into is that there's a false positive rate in pulse ox screening because It can be other things that it catches. So like neonatal sepsis, there are a number of other conditions that will trigger a failed pulse ox. But at the same time, it's not it's failed. It's false positive in that it's not CCHD, but it is something else. So sensitivity to screening is one major one that we ran into, and that was the evidence review process was heavily based in that. The second would be that they don't believe that there is sufficient access to reliable treatment. And part of the Secretary's Advisory Committee's charter is that they won't implement things as part of the screening that they don't think that there's a screening for. Like, we can't just screen and say, like, here's what it is, sorry. And I think that there are a lot of families that would argue, well, at least we would know the name, at least we would know where to focus our dollars. But the way they structured the charter, they just won't do it that way. Then I think top three, not just like filling space with a third, but the other issue that we ran into was the politics of the Secretary's Advisory Committee are changing. It's dealing with the environment of everything healthcare. And the Secretary, if you've seen her on any news show, is like taking shots on healthcare reform all the time and was extremely sensitive to mandating the states to do anything. And I think that particularly now, that is a very valid concern on the parent advocate side. On her side, I don't really care about her. But as far as on the parent advocate side, you have to understand that, like, this is the world we live in, and this is especially the world that she lives in. And so they were very, very hesitant to add something that was going to be, especially something so common. I think in the rare disease community, they go, oh, it's all part of the same screen. And there's just kind of this general lumping that they do. But especially ones that involve new technology. I mean, there's a difference between PKU and something that needs like tandem mass spectrometry. It's new equipment for the labs. The labs come to their states and they go, hey, we need more money to do this. There's no way we're going to be able to do it. States go to the feds and go, we need more money to do this. It was your mandate. That's a real problem. So, those aren't great answers, but those are the ones we experienced wholeheartedly in the last 2 years. So it's going through the committee process in your state now. Yeah. Let me tell you the one thing that I experienced with all these states falling is the reason it was so hard for us to keep up is we have this, online kind of Facebook advocacy network of parents. They'd be like, I ran into my senator in the grocery store, and then I told him my story, and then he introduced a bill. And I cannot tell you how reactive, especially state representatives, are to individual stories. And it has nothing to do with their district. It has to do with being there and them hearing about it, because otherwise they hear the squeaky wheel. And, state legislator is like, oh, man, I'm glad someone does that, because that is a brutal job, especially when no one knows who their assemblyman is, no one knows who their state senator is unless they have a reason to, or their business depends on it. So the fact that you're giving kind of a personal appeal, especially if you have a small community or a large community, any kind of community, of not just those that are affected or families that are affected, but family members of families, friends of families, to talk about really how big this community is. That oftentimes is the thing that'll get you over the hill. That's what happened in California, and California was a brutal budget environment when we got there. And again, I feel bad because I'm talking about this like through the legislative lens, which is like a terrible gray lens to see everything through, but it is a bit of the reality. The more personal this is for this, especially on the state side, the farther it goes, and that's absolutely based on my experience.